You can hear the eagles wanting to get back onto their nest, which we'll let them do in a minute.
Today on This American Land, some extreme biology is sometimes required to study bald eagles. We'll have a soaring success story.
Folks in my generation are ready to get past the bickering back and forth. We're ready to come to the table and find common ground on issues like this.
Wilderness. Nobody's making any more of it. Time to figure out how to take care of what we've got.
The Indo-Pacific lionfish is a perfect invader in the Atlantic.
No perfect answers yet to this powerful predator. Those stories and more now on This American Land. Funding for This American Land provided by the Weiss Foundation and the Turner Foundation.
Hello and welcome to This American Land. I'm Bruce Burkhart.
And I'm Caroline Ravel. We've got a great show ahead about protecting our natural resources, from forests to fish and other wildlife.
Successful conservation usually involves local teamwork. In southwestern Montana, an effort to improve forest health, reduce fire risk, and preserve backcountry traditions involves a lot of give and take. Gary Stryker has our story.
I started working for the Whitetail Ranch in 1957. I've been working in the Bob Marshall ever since, every year. And hopefully this will make 55 years if I can get in there today. So, and it looks like we're gonna make her.
If you're looking for an adventure in Montana, the Bob Marshall Wilderness tops the list. And nobody knows the Bob better than Smoke Elser.
My grandkids worked out to see how many nights I've slept in a sleeping bag in the backcountry, and it ended up being over 22 years.
Smoke has been horsepacking clients into the Bob Marshall since before it was officially declared wilderness in 1964.
One of my mentors, Tom Edwards, he always said it was the hush of the land. It's a place where you have to rely on yourself, and nature has all the upper hand, and yet you have to fit into it.
A journey into wilderness must be taken at nature's pace, and there's no better way to travel than with the help of a four-footed friend. There hasn't been any new wilderness designated in Montana for nearly 30 years, but the contentious battle over land use issues started cooling down recently when loggers and wilderness advocates began to talk with each other.
The realization that we aren't making any more wilderness resource, and we aren't making any more timberland, and we aren't making any more habitat for wildlife. All of a sudden people said, gee, we're running out of this stuff. Maybe we better start taking care of it, and we got to figure out a way to take care of it.
The result is a bill working its way through Washington that would add 700,000 acres of new wilderness in Montana, designate areas for off-road vehicle use, and guarantee 100,000 acres of timber for local lumber mills.
And what we're trying to do right now is set aside a little of this wilderness so that future generations will have the opportunity to make good, solid land management decisions for the future generations.
The future generation includes Zach Porter, a wilderness advocate and program director with the Montana Wilderness Association.
People were at loggerheads over these issues, and nothing was getting done. Nothing was getting done for wilderness. We weren't doing timber projects where they could have and should have been done. And fortunately, people realized that we have more in common than not, and decided to come to the table together.
One of the businesses at the table was Pyramid Mountain Lumber, in the small town of Seeley Lake on the edge of the Bob Marshall Wilderness and Lolo National Forest. The family-owned mill produces high-end lumber products, but doesn't own its own land. It depends on access to the timber in the national forest to keep its 250 employees working.
Well, I've long told the timber industry that we can't get what we want by ourselves. There has to be something in it for everybody. And there's an interest in wilderness, as well as an interest in forest management. And where there are critical streams that need work. And I think the ultimate realization is we can have all of it together that we can't have separately.
That bill in Congress, the Forest Jobs and Recreation Act, would give local mills access to 100,000 acres over the next 10 to 15 years. Most of the logging would be forest management projects that would restore watersheds and take out trees killed by the recent pine beetle outbreak. Business owners in the town of Seeley Lake need the lumber mill and summer visitors to survive.
Everything that you would ever need to survive is in my shop.
Adrene Marks owns one of the most popular businesses in town. She supports more access to timber for the loggers and trails for snowmobiles, but also supports the need to create more wilderness.
Everything is contingent on the natural resources in all of its different places, in recreation, in timber, in wilderness areas, in outfitting, all of it. So we need all of those segments healthy. And to me, I've seen nothing finer than this act.
Just north of Seeley, Zach Porter looks out across Rainy Lake at a mountainside that would be added to the Bob Marshall Wilderness.
Folks in my generation are ready to get past the bickering back and forth. We're ready to come to the table and find common ground on issues like this. This is a landscape that would be protected and enhanced through the Forest Jobs and Recreation Act. We have the chance to bring the apron of the wilderness down to these lower elevations where wildlife can thrive in ways that they can't necessarily up in the rock and ice that we've protected before.
Porter has trekked hundreds of miles, exploring many of the 25 new national forest areas that would be designated wilderness.
What we've got behind us here is the 10,000-foot crest of the East Pioneers' proposed wilderness.
The Pioneers are the main watershed for the Big Hole River, one of Montana's famous blue ribbon trout streams. With warmer winters, pine beetles have survived and killed most of the lodgepole and whitebark pine trees that once protected the winter snowpack. Adding more wilderness to the area might help protect the health of the river by keeping areas roadless.
Yeah, it's not folding right.
Charlie O'Leary, a former county commissioner, has been hiking the Pioneers since he was a kid.
In the wildlife up there, we've seen sheep, goats, moose, elk, mule deer, and lots of bears. It's a tradition in our family to go into the wilderness. It gives you that place for peace and quiet, to reflect, to have fun, to fish, to hike, ride horses, to view wildlife, and to just be in a place that has been that way for thousands of years.
One of those places is Grayling Lake, where the ice is melting as the wildflowers bloom. It would be designated wilderness under the Act. Back on the edge of the Bob Marshall, Smoke Elser and his crew are finishing packing their mules and saddling their horses. Connie Long is considered the most important person on the crew. She's the cook, which isn't an easy job in grizzly bear country.
We do everything we possibly can. We don't burn food in the campfire. We do special things like I strain my dishwater to get out all the food particles through cheesecloth, and then we incinerate it in a tin can. Outfitting brings a lot of money to the area because people come and because we start so early in the morning, they have to have a place to stay, so the motels and hotels in the area really benefit, and restaurants because they need to eat breakfast and dinner, and souvenir shops because everybody wants to take something home with them.
When you get as old as I am, by golly, you get some respect here.
With 23 miles to ride to their wilderness camp, Smoke is going to make his mark. 55 years riding into the Bob.
Maybe there's something in here that's more valuable than trees and gold and silver, and more valuable than photographs and all that other kind of thing. Maybe it's clean air, maybe it's clean water. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the sanity of man.
The bald eagle recovery over the past few decades is a story that's an inspiration for all of wildlife protection. It took passion and perseverance for our national bird to bounce back. But there are still some mysteries to solve, as we'll learn from Vince Patton of Oregon Field Guide.
At 6 in the morning, the thermometer reads 0.
I spent a long time looking at them, a lot of cold mornings, out counting birds and looking at their habitat.
We've been told this is the best time in one of the best places in the U.S. to witness one of the great triumphs in modern wildlife recovery.
Yeah, they're coming out pretty high this morning. There's about a dozen of them or more in the air.
Bald eagles leave the forest where they've spent the night. But this morning, they play coy. We and the other bird watchers only see a couple of dozen.
Yeah, if I don't see 50 or more at a time, I'm not impressed. So.
Ralph Opp lives in the one region that attracts more bald eagles than any place else in the U.S. except Alaska. The Klamath Basin of southern Oregon lures 700 to 800 eagles every winter. Back in 1976, he was the biologist who discovered the shelter in the forest where all the eagles go every night. He was instrumental in having that night roost set aside as the Bear Valley National Wildlife Refuge.
We weren't aware here anyway that night roosts were that important, and fortunately we discovered that in the 70s and was able to protect it. So it is a federal bald eagle refuge, one of the few in the country.
Eagles rarely allow people to come very close. Yet here in southern Oregon, birdwatchers can approach less than 50 yards away. Their presence barely ruffles a feather.
A gathering of eagles, bald eagles, is called a convocation. And I think that's pretty appropriate. I like that for, it's a regal bird. Yeah, they don't just have a meeting, they have a convocation.
Many of these regal symbols of America are actually Canadians. A large number fly 1,200 miles from the Northern Territories to winter in Oregon, lured here by food. Hundreds of thousands of geese, swans, cranes, and ducks stop at the Klamath Marshes.
Something like 80% of all of the waterfowl that migrate north and south in the Pacific Flyway funnel through this area. The eagles have learned to come here and winter in consort with them.
The eagles eat well. Dinner is served on the frozen lake, often within view of lucky survivors. To see so many bald eagles in one spot may seem spectacular, but it's downright astonishing considering how few eagles there were 50 years ago.
We were down to about 20 nesting pairs in the state of Oregon, in the 50s and 60s, and then on into the 70s is when we started our recovery activities for the bald eagle. And we're back to probably 700-800 nesting pairs in Oregon now, a much safer, stable population for these birds.
The rebound in eagle numbers can be seen across the state, including the Willamette Valley. In one day south of Albany, we see nearly 4 dozen.
In 2010, in January, we counted 171 bald eagles just in this Linn County area.
Just Linn County?
Just Linn County. This is probably the second largest concentration of bald eagles in the state during the wintertime.
For 7 winters in a row, Jeff Fleischer has led a survey effort for the Audubon Society. He and an army of volunteer researchers drive 146 routes around the state, counting birds of prey.
Oh, hello. We've got a major dining center over here.
The eagles have found a dead sheep.
We've got 1, 2, right close to the carcass.
When they stalk smaller prey, winter's bare cottonwoods make for the ideal hunting perch.
For example, the eagles back here, they know we're here. I mean, they can see us as well as we can see them through the binoculars that we're using.
Just as in Klamath, the numbers of eagles in the Willamette Valley are on the rise.
In the last 5 years, we've gone from 40 or 50 to 170 2 years ago.
There's one spot in Oregon where eagles have some trouble. On the lower Columbia, numbers are up, yet many of the nests fail to hatch chicks.
They're producing about half the number of eagles that they should produce. And we've been trying to track down since the 1980s why that's the case.
That's right.
To solve the mystery of the failed nests, Jeremy Buck must go where the eagles live.
What we do is we come in very fast. We try to get a line up into the tree so we can ascend up to that nest, pull one of the eggs out. We need to get the slack out.
Jeremy is a biologist with U.S. Fish and Wildlife.
This is the fun part.
Over 15 years of research, Jeremy has climbed into 30 eagle nests.
I get through a little bit of brush here.
The Sitka spruce have a lot of branches up there. They're actually kind of fun to climb. You just got to make sure you do it safely. Beautiful view over the river.
You can hear the eagles wanting to get back onto their nest, which we'll let them do in a minute.
More than 100 feet up, Jeremy reaches the nest. They are large, strong, and heavy. They can weigh up to a ton. Sturdy enough for Jeremy to climb in if necessary.
Looks like a lot of feathers up here. Looks like the eagles have covered up eggs with moss. These eggs are cold, which means they've been probably cold for some time.
Jeremy will take one egg. It could contain clues about why it failed to hatch.
As long as we can move out quickly, they'll come back and they'll sit on that remaining egg.
2 days later, in the lab, Jeremy is ready to begin analyzing why this egg produced no chick.
124.13. The egg should look like a chicken egg. When you break open a chicken egg and a bright yellow yolk comes out, that's a healthy egg. That's what it should look like. Ours was kind of degraded, very milky, like a rotten egg.
After several years of testing eggs, they've found a pattern. The shells are too thin. And when they test the shell itself, they find elevated levels of a toxic chemical no one thinks about anymore, DDT, and its byproduct, DDE.
I was shocked at the results. The DDE was still in the eggs at high concentrations. And that thing
Every egg tested since 1985 has DDT residues.
They generally come out white. This one's quite a bit dirty.
The levels are higher along the Columbia than any other river system in Oregon. Jeremy suspects the pesticide has collected in the sediments here, where the river grows slow and wide. DDT lingers, despite being banned in the U.S. 40 years ago.
It's very persistent. It takes a long time to break down in the environment.
Despite low birth rates here, even along the Columbia, eagle numbers are healthier. Bald eagles spent 40 years under special protection. In 2007, federal biologists officially removed them from the endangered species list. Ralph Opp was one of those biologists who ensured Oregon played an important role in their recovery.
Eagles are my life. Yeah, I was lucky. I feel real good about it, yeah. We did a lot here to help get them off of the endangered species list.
From the banks of the Columbia River to the marshes of Klamath Falls, success is in the air.
Like their namesake, lionfish are tough customers. In the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico, these invasive predators are muscling out native fish like snapper and grouper. To deal with this, conservationists and sports fishermen have come up with a sporty way to control them. Just off the south coast of Florida, the ocean floor is home to a complex and diverse ecosystem. In this underwater jungle of dense coral, a delicate web of life flourishes. This is the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary, a protected stretch of ocean covering 2,000 square miles. In recent years, however, a small but voracious predator arrived here, the invasive Indo-Pacific lionfish, a fish that, though popular in home aquariums, threatens the natural balance of life in these waters.
The Indo-Pacific lionfish is a perfect invader in the Atlantic. It has no natural predators, it reproduces very quickly, pretty much eats anything indiscriminately.
With an invasive fish, they are competing with our native fish for critical resources such as food, space, those sorts of things.
They've established a breeding population. It started off of North Carolina and they've spread south all throughout the Caribbean, and now they're working their way into the Gulf of Mexico.
As a step to control the lionfish invasion here in South Florida, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is taking an unusual step, issuing permits for divers to collect large numbers of lionfish.
The first lionfish in the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary was spotted in January of 2009, and slowly but surely we've seen increasing numbers. They are starting to appear more frequently and at higher densities.
See all these spikes up here? No, not
Today, these divers are out to do their part, participating in a lionfish derby, a one-day competition where participants are allowed to collect as many lionfish as they can during daylight hours.
You guys ever dove down here?
Nope. We started in 2010 with lionfish derbies in the Florida Keys, and we have 3 each year, and the purpose of the derbies is mostly to have all of our constituents go out into the resource and help us control the lionfish population. Everyone who likes to use the reef, they go to their numbers for lobster season and for, just pleasure dives and snorkeling and everything else. And over the last 2 years, they've all come to us and said, hey, we're seeing a lot of lionfish out at our favorite spots. We're trying to get them to go back out to those locations where they've seen those lionfish before and then collect them, whether that's with a net or in certain areas of the sanctuary you're allowed to spearfish.
This is number 8 derby for us. Yeah, we started seeing this happening a couple of years back, traveling throughout the Caribbean. It's a very real problem, and we're doing our best to try to control it on local levels. We're leading the charge, I think.
Prizes are given for most lionfish caught, largest and smallest.
All right, this is 265.
Some specimens are dissected for research, and others will be served for dinner. Lionfish are quite tasty if prepared correctly.
It's not a fishy taste. I think it's really good.
They must, however, be handled with special care.
Lionfish are not poisonous, they are venomous. Their dorsal fins and their anal fins have skin around them that is toxic, more or less. It's venomous. So that's why you really want to be careful when you're handling these guys.
Researchers from around the country attend these derbies to gather data on the population to better predict the overall impact of growing lionfish numbers throughout the Keys.
I'm interested in knowing what the lionfish are eating. So what we're doing is pulling the stomachs out of the lionfish. We'll take them back to Gainesville at our laboratory, and then I'll go through them under a microscope and be able to identify what they're eating out on the reef.
Because lionfish reproduce year-round and produce thousands of eggs at a time, the species is extremely prolific, And since 2009, thousands of lionfish have been removed from the ecosystem thanks to these derbies. This is not, however, the solution to the problem.
The purpose of these types of derbies is to control numbers and get an idea of where and how many are out there.
Here's a quick look at a story we're working on for a future ship. Loggerhead turtles make an epic journey to deliver their eggs, but now the turtles are facing enormous challenges to their habitat.
For all of us here at This American Land, thanks for watching. You can always check us out at thisamericanland.org. We'll see you next time.
For more information about this program, visit thisamericanland.org. Funding for This American Land provided by the Weiss Foundation and the Turner Foundation.